Okay, so welcome everyone to the We Can Reason webinar series. Now, all of our events are free and everyone is welcome, but we do have a few expenses. We have Meetup, Zoom, webpage, and now we have some room rentals. So please donate, just whatever you can, nothing excessive, just any amount you can. Just go to the RMA webpage and Rocky Mountain Atheist and click on the donate button. And we'll be putting, Adrian will be putting up the email or the link in the chat so that you can find it easily. Now, we are an inclusive community of skeptics, atheists, free thinkers, and we welcome everyone of all backgrounds. And we have never had any disruptive attendees of our webinars. And with your help, we're going to keep it that way. So discussion is strongly encouraged, but let's everybody show respect for each other. Now, at the end of Andy's presentation, we'll have a Q&A. And if you have a question, please use the hand-raising icon, which you can find by clicking on the reactions button down below. And we'll call on you to unmute yourself and ask your question. Now, after you've asked your question, please lower your hand because it can get a little confusing when there are a lot of hands up. And now,
Lois, do you mind taking over calling on people?
Sure, I'll do that.
Will you monitor the hands and the questions?
Yes, I will do that, Andy. Sure.
Thank you.
Okay, and now it is my privilege and pleasure to introduce Dr. Andy Thomson, with whom we've been speaking a bit. And he's going to talk on why we believe in gods. And he is just the right person to explain that to us because his current interests are applying the principles of evolutionary psychology to better understand conditions such as depression, substance abuse, violence, even suicide, terrorism, and yes, religious belief. Andy's a staff psychiatrist at Counseling and Psychological Services at the Student Health Services and the Institute of Law, Psychiatry, and Public Policy at the University of Virginia. And he's also a trustee for the Richard Dawkins Foundation for Reason and Science. And if I went into all of his previous positions and accomplishments, we'd take too much time. So there's only one accomplishment I just simply can't pass over. Yes. Andy climbed Mount Kilimanjaro in Tanzania, also Kalapatar in Nepal, and he climbed to the base camp of Mount Everest, which I think is an amazing achievement. And now, Andy, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Lois. As Hitchens used to say, brothers, sisters, friends, comrades, thank you for coming out tonight. Let me see if I can share the screen here. Okay. Okay. Again, thank you for having me. Let's begin. On the dogmas of religion, as distinguished from moral principles, all mankind from the beginning of the world to the present day have been fighting, quarreling, burning, and torturing one another over abstractions unintelligible to themselves and to all others, and absolutely beyond the comprehension of the human mind. Thomas Jefferson wrote those words in 1816. And really the essence of my talk tonight is this. Should you run into Mr. Jefferson next week, you could say to him, "No, Mr. President, religion is no longer beyond the comprehension of the human mind. In point of fact, we are getting closer and closer to a comprehensive cognitive neuroscience of religious belief. Why we are vulnerable to religious beliefs, why the beliefs and the specific beliefs we have, why we're vulnerable to believing in them, accepting them, and why we spread them, and why we tenaciously hold on to them." And further, Mr. Jefferson, we know that you were very interested naturalist, and we're in the position we're in with regards to religion, because when you wrote those words in 1816, there was a 7-year-old boy in England, Charles Darwin, who would grow up to give us the only workable explanation we have for the variety and design of all life on Earth, including the design of the human mind. Darwin, at the end of Origin, made this profound statement that psychology will be based on a new foundation. And it took about 150 years before researchers started to seriously apply this. And it has led to now the disciplines of evolutionary psychology, Darwinian psychiatry. And so you could tell Mr. Jefferson now we are far, far removed from 1816 scientifically, and really are close to a comprehensive understanding of why human minds generate religious beliefs. What are my goals tonight? My goals are to give you the basics of this so that, and I hope so that they're sort of in your bones so you understand them. So it's not just from rote memorization or something like that, but so that you have the fundamental understanding of what generates religious beliefs, sort of the DNA of it, the basic structure of religious beliefs. Let me give you a little bit of a roadmap of where we are going to go tonight, and so that you have an idea of the layout of this talk. And I think perhaps a different analogy and a better analogy would be that this is going to be sort of like a tapas meal, and there's going to be 10 different servings. And if you want to make note of this so you can keep score, the first is going to be, we're going to talk about the modern Darwinian synthesis. The second serving will be human evolution. The third will be the structure of religious ideas, the basic structure. The fourth will be junk food and pornography, and the assertion that if you understand the psychology of junk food and pornography, you understand the psychology of religion. The fifth serving will be attachment theory. I think the evidence is that one of the crucial pieces of humanity, our mammalian attachment system, really does lie at the heart of what makes us vulnerable to religion. The sixth serving will be something that's got a confusing name called decoupled cognition, but it's basically why we can easily imagine an afterlife, why we're vulnerable to spirits and a belief in souls and a belief in an afterlife. The seventh serving will be something called hyperactive agency detection mechanisms and hyperactive agency detection mechanisms and minimally counterintuitive worlds. The eighth serving will be theory of mind and how that generates religious belief. The ninth serving will be something about beyond the individual, why religions spread, what has led to the rapid and continued spread of religions. And then we'll finish on the on ritual and the neurobiology of ritual and why that is so powerful. So I will try to remind you of the numbers so you'll know where we are on this journey, and buckle up, and here we go. So this is the basic view of natural selection. that it operates at the level of the individual. And we now know that that is wrong, that natural selection operates at the level of the gene, a DNA. And if you step back from it, that makes sense. What's the fundamental unit of life? DNA, the genes. So that's really where natural selection is going to operate. And I love this poem of Les Murray's, Life's Slim Volume Spirally Bound. And I think this is the best single statement of the modern Darwinian synthesis that I've ever seen. Any organism is an integrated collection of problem-solving devices, adaptations, shaped by natural selection over evolutionary time to promote in some specific way the survival of the genes that directed their construction. So my heart solves the problem of pumping blood, hemoglobin solves the problem of transporting the oxygen. At every single level of biological inquiry, natural selection, functional design. Now, the other thing I like about this explanation is this is also the best description we have of the human mind. The mind is what the brain does, and it is an integrated collection of problem-solving devices, adaptations, shaped by natural selection over evolutionary time to promote in some specific way the survival of the genes that directed their construction. And we're going to be talking about primarily social adaptations. And this summarizes the modern Darwinian synthesis. I don't know if you can read it. It says, well, my psychiatrist says, if it makes you happy, do it. And what this illustrates is that our feelings and our behaviors are designed by our genes for our genes' benefit, not necessarily our own. And I think suicide is one of the best illustrations of the modern Darwinian synthesis. And the modern Darwinian synthesis helps us understand suicide, which heretofore, I think, has not been understood. And if I have 3 children in ancestral environments, that's 150% of my genes. If I'm a burden to them and I kill myself, that's a net increase of 50, that's 150% of my genes. It's a huge increase. And we know that it only takes like 2% genetic advantage for a trait to become instantiated in an organism over, I think, something like 20 generations. Steve Pinker has a great analogy. The mind is what the brain does, and it's sort of like the Apollo spacecraft. What's the Apollo spacecraft but this compact array of engineering devices that are solving a constant stream of problems, only some of which become conscious to the astronauts. And that's the way I think you want to conceive the human mind. All of you are looking at me right now. I'm an upside down 2-dimensional image on your retina, and myriad adaptations turn it into the 3-dimensional view that you have. And similarly, it is social adaptations, social cognitive adaptations that originated for other reasons that go into building religious beliefs and making us vulnerable to religious beliefs. So that's the modern Darwinian synthesis. The second serving tonight, human evolution. We are risen apes, not fallen angels, right? And it's very hard for human narcissism to get around that basic idea. We're animals, and we're basically apes, right? Risen apes, African apes. And Darwin knew this when he wrote The Origin. But as all of you probably know, he sat on his ideas, and he knew that we were probably related to the apes in Africa. He did finally publish that in 1870. And I want to be clear here. I know this is a very educated audience. I appreciate that a lot of you probably know a lot of this, but I want to go over it because, as the basketball coach Wooden at UCLA said, always go back to fundamentals, 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 fundamentals. I think this is a great way to think about human evolution and get our minds around the timescales involved. So imagine that today, the 24 hours in today, each hour is 100,000 years. So 2.4 million years in today. And it was about 2.4 million years that our genus Homo shows up. So that's midnight last night. And we get out of Africa maybe sometime, I think around, the beginning of the day. Some of us move out of Africa, but the basics of it are that it is not until probably somewhere between 9 and 10 o'clock tonight that our species, Homo sapiens, shows up. Archaic Homo sapiens in Africa. And it is not until about 70,000 years ago, like, what is that? I figure it was like 11:20 at night, that we survive a population bottleneck. We may have gotten down to somewhere between 600 and 2,000 breeding individuals and survived. And that's when behaviorally modern Homo sapiens is certainly in existence, you and I. It is not until 6 minutes before midnight that our hunter-gatherer ancestors started to settle down into agricultural communities in the Near East, just 6 minutes before midnight. And probably settled down to brew beer, not to farm food, but that's another story. And it is in this great expanse of time that we developed the social cognition that makes us human, and the social cognition that generates religious belief. And as I'll show you, some of these mechanisms are even before Homo, Lucy, and even before Lucy, back to our early mammalian heritage. But it's very hard for most people to get their minds around the vast time sequences involved, even in our genus Homo. So always keep in mind, when you're thinking of any trait or any human phenomena, the evolutionary past frames the experienced present, right? When you go to your family physician and he asked about your family history, show him this picture. This is your family history. And these are the ancestors that had to deal with complicated, dangerous environments, and to try to understand what were largely invisible forces that were shaping their lives, and to have some cognitive explanation for them to help them survive. All right. Now, the Homo erectus is on the left, a brain that's maybe 1,000 cc's. Homo sapiens, us, is on the right. I think it's about 1,600 cubic centimeters. But what I want you to look at is the frontal lobe area, the front of the brain. And you can see that is the largest expansion. And the frontal lobes of our brain are sort of who we are. And who we are social creatures. The most challenging part of our environment by the time Homo sapiens comes along is not the physical environment. The most challenging, complex part of the environment is each other. And it's thought that that is what drove the evolution of our frontal lobes and our complex social cognition that helped us survive and contributes to religious belief. Right. So, and I think you all know this, we left Africa and we're the last surviving hominid, and we basically made our way completely around the world. And of course, one of the great questions is, why are we the last surviving hominid? And one of the reasons may be that we achieved what the insects achieved, which is something called eusociality. We have all the markings of eusociality: multi-generational care of the young, cooperative breeding, cooperative care of the young. I'll gladly let you hold my 1-year-old granddaughter. A chimpanzee mother won't let her sister hold her baby, right? We have complex division of labor. We defend our local communes, and we have altruistic self-sacrifice. Interestingly, there is no eusocial species without altruistic self-sacrifice. There are no non-eusocial species that have suicide. And this, again, helps us understand the phenomena of suicide, that we sacrifice ourselves for kin, or in the modern world, often fictive kin. Right. So again, this is the context in which all of the mechanisms we're going to be talking about, or most of them, evolved. Another way to think about it is that life was an endless camping trip with close relatives. That's the environment that led to who we are, the mechanisms in our head that define us. I think another thing that's important socially, and this is a sidelight a bit, but is to keep in mind that just put aside all the racial, ethnic, religious differences, okay? All 8 billion people on the earth today are the sons and daughters of a small band of African hunter-gatherers who survived terrible environments. And we are all their descendants. We are all African. And nothing pleases me more than to remind a white nationalist that he's actually African. So that's human evolution. Let's now go to religion and religious ideas. And the fundamental structure of religious ideas, they're byproducts of cognitive mechanisms designed originally for other purposes. They're all, in some way, artifacts of our ability to imagine social worlds, to think about others, others' minds, other people. They're all human concepts with some alterations. And this is not a new idea. I love this quote of Percy Shelley. There is no attribute of God which is not either borrowed from the passions and powers of the human mind, or which is not a negation. That go over this, that these were useful falsehoods that helped our ancestors explain the world with theories that were simple, orderly, regular, and could be communicated to others. And they used invisible forces to make sense of an unknown world. And if you step back and think about it, we're not that much different in many ways. How many of you have seen a gene, right? And we talk about genes as if they have agency, right? How many of you have actually seen a COVID virus, right? Still, our world is, to understand our world, we have to imagine invisible forces. We have better ideas of those forces, but our cognition may not be as far away from our ancestors as our vanity wants us to believe. Okay, that's the basic of religious ideas. Now, I want to show you something that will sometimes offend people, but I think it's a useful, again, it's a useful concept for understanding. And it is that if you understand junk food and you understand pornography, you understand the basic psychology of religion. Now, all of us have ancestral appetites that crave sweets. They were originally the sweets of ripe fruit. The modern world gives it to us in a supernormal stimulus. I don't know about you, but if you know, if I've got the choice between a peach and a brownie, I may think I should eat the peach, but I'm going to go for the brownie every time. And it gives me a supernormal stimulus. Similarly, we craved fat, but it was the fat of lean game meat, which were a crucial source of protein. They were rare, crucial sources of calories, condensed packages of calories and proteins. So we all have meat cravings in the form of fat cravings. The modern world gives it to us in novel form, gives it to us in, you know, marbleized beef, French fries soaked in meat juice, and we drink Coca-Cola, which again, an artificial sweetener. And so there's a mismatch between what our appetites were evolved for and the novel things that the modern environment can provide. And this, I think, helps us understand obesity. Remember, starvation was always right around the corner. If you had an opportunity to eat, you ate everything in sight because, you might not see another meal for days. Now, the modern world gives us this super normal stuff, and we have it available 24/7. And it, I think, is one of the big contributors to obesity. Right. So, and somebody sent me this slide. I can't not show it. It's one of my favorites. Now, what is porn? Porn is, in a sense, the same thing if you think about it. Pornography gives men, primarily men who are the greatest consumers, gives men supernormal stimuli that hijacks their evolved sexual desires and preferences, right? And it's why men get addicted to porn, and it's why porn is such an industry. Again, because it hijacks our ancient sexual interests and our attractiveness responses, all those things, with super normal stimuli. And this is basically why porn is so powerful and consumed. Right now, what's this got to do with religion? All right, this is a picture of a Pentecostal church. What are the people doing? Right, they're reaching up. And if you've been around a toddler, what does a toddler do? A toddler sort of comes up over to you and reaches up, asking to be picked up. This is a manifestation of the attachment system. And one of the things that religion does is it hijacks our attachment system. And as I hope to show you, the attachment system is one of the most important aspects of our humanity and our psychology that religion exploits. So, number 5, let's look at that. And the attachment system in humans was described by Mary Ainsworth, a psychologist who was actually here at UVA. I had the privilege of knowing her. John Bowlby, a British psychiatrist, and they're the ones that mapped out the attachment system. If you have any interest in this, I would encourage you to look at a 1990 article in the Atlantic called On Being Attached by Robert Caron, or if you want something that I think is just outstanding, is a book by Bethany Saltman called The Strange Situation. She's a poet. She's a mother. She became anxious when her daughter was born about her relationship with her daughter. She did a 10-year deep dive into the science of attachment, and she wrote this just wonderful book, which will give you the science of attachment, and it's this artistic triumph between her personal experience and the science. I can't recommend it enough. So this is the attachment system. The original part of the attachment system is obviously the infinite mother dyad, and the attachment system is old. When I was talking about a system that's old, this is mammalian. This goes back, to our mammalian origins, with something like 70 million years ago. All of you have seen pictures like this. Now, if you're interested in this, I would suggest a book by John Wathay called The Illusion of God's Presence. He's a neuroscientist. In my little book on religion, I write about the attachment system. But John, I think, has gone where nobody else has gone, and he lays out better than anybody the full complements of the attachment system, particularly our neonatal and early infant attachment systems. He lays that out and really makes the argument and backs it up that that's one of the fundamental and most important mechanisms in the formation of religious belief. And basically, he argues we, like most mammals, are born hardwired with the knowledge, and I put that in quotes, but it's not conscious knowledge, obviously, but we're born hardwired that when we're born, mothers exist. Mothers know how to help. Mothers are able to, want to, and will help, particularly when the infant, the newborn, is crying. And think of any species, not just us. And I hope you start to see this. And he makes the argument, again, supports it with evidence that, this is the DNA of religion. And here's its manifestation in some of our religious belief, the certainty of faith. I know it's true. Again, an echo of that certainty that caretakers exist. Mothers know how to help. Our vulnerability to a belief in an omniscient caretaker who wants to and will help and is omnipotent. And again, if you can call up even your own childhood and your feelings about your parents, particularly whoever the main attachment figures in your life were, and I think you'll start to get a taste of some of this if you can call back how you felt about the important attachment figures in your life. And the mother will respond when she hears you crying. They will answer prayers. And again, John does a lovely job of showing the manifestations of our early attachment system in religion. If you're around a newborn, put your finger in the palm of a newborn and watch them grasp. And they also have what's called the Moro reflex, which is, again, a basic attachment mechanism. That's just we all have it hardwired, and, long before conscious awareness. Mothers nourish. Mothers have a face and a melodic voice. And again, if you've ever had a child, think of how we talk to children in motherese, a different voice, a melodic voice that signals that we are a caretaker. And these circuits we're born with, we're hardwired, and these circuits persist into adulthood, are still there, and are still able to be hijacked and activated. And they form the basis of all relationships. So our friendships, our romantic partners, our close colleagues, all of them arise from the basic attachment system. And that when we're stressed, these circuits can easily create the illusion of a loving presence, particularly when we are feeling helpless and powerless in particular circumstances. The saying, there are no atheists in what is it, in foxholes. Now, other manifestations of the attachment system. Look, everybody can look at this picture. No, a mother is rocking a baby, and what's going on here is our vestibular system is being stimulated. That's the soothing response when we are rocked. And again, it's part of the attachment system. Right? And I think everybody has had this experience. And this is, again, part of your attachment system is the vestibular system. This is what's going on. And here I am rocking, all right. So what happens at the Wailing Wall? If you've been or seen films of the Wailing Wall, in Jerusalem, all these men are just, they're basically rocking. They're stimulating their vestibular system, stimulating feelings of attachment. What happens at church services? We take communion, and taking communion is being nourished by a caretaker. One of my favorite things is, I think it comes from Dan Dennett, but the Catholic Church insists that the wine is not metaphorically the wine. They think it's been converted into the actual blood of Christ. And I think it was Dan Dennett who said, okay, they think it's the actual blood of Christ. Let's take some of it, take it to the lab, and we'll get Jesus's DNA. Go back, if any of you watched the coronation of King Charles, and we'll talk more about rituals. But I hope, in this picture, you notice who is he surrounded by here on either side, right? It's children, right? Again, evoking a caretaking response. Another thing, if you saw the coronation, obviously the choir was a boys' choir. Again, children evoking the attachment system. And think about if you were Christian and brought up in a Christian church like I was, and that's obviously part of my culture. If you look closely, most of your hymns have echoes of the attachment system. Think of Amazing Grace. Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Just every verse of Amazing Grace is about ultimately the attachment system. Think of Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, coming for to carry me home. Again, it's the attachment system. And, obviously there's some militaristic hymns, Onward Christian Soldiers, but again, think of your favorite hymns, and I promise you they will evoke the attachment system. And just to give you one more example, the Queen's favorite hymn was a hymn called Praise My Soul, the King of Heaven. And this is just some of the verses. Praise him for his grace and favor to his people in distress. Father-like he tends and spares us. Well, our feeble frame he knows. In his hand he gently bears us, rescues us from all his foes. Again, a caretaking parental figure. And as we'll come back to, he also knows us. He knows our suffering, right? But it's the attachment system writ large. Look at scripture. And I think particularly, obviously once you get underneath all the slaughter in the Old Testament, and then you also look in the New Testament, the attachment system is all over the Bible. Psalm 27, when my father and my mother forsake me, then the Lord will take me up. And again, just pull out your Bible and look, or think of some of what the things you remember. And I think you will see that the attachment system is evoked almost all the time at some level. All right. So that's the attachment system. Now we'll move on. Number 6, decoupled cognition. And this is a fancy name for the fact that we can, in our cognition, we can, in the present, move around in time and place. So all of you right now can remember something that happened last week in a different place. You can remember the details. It's like you can go there and you can be, even though you're in Calgary right now, listening to me, watching me, in your mind, you can remember something at another place with another person in a complex social interaction. More frequently, you can imagine a future. You can think about who you have to talk to. You're still listening closely to me, but you can simultaneously imagine a conversation you're going to have with somebody tomorrow or next week. So you can decouple your present cognition and go to the future, go to the past, and have complex social interactions with people. And you can even have complex social interactions with people you haven't met yet, right? So somebody's invited you to do something, you know them or sort of know them or don't know them, and you can already start to think about how you might want to interact with them. So we can decouple in time and place, and we also decouple in mind and body. And what is this about? Well, this helps us understand the whole business of souls. This is a graveyard in what is now Israel, an adolescent boy, and antlers were put in his grave with him. And so, and this is just all over earlier burials, but there's clear evidence of people imagining an afterlife, right? And obviously Egyptian civilization was, based on it to the extreme. but the idea of an afterlife. How can we have such a cognition? And one of the main reasons is that we can decouple our cognition both in mind and body. And I'm going to illustrate this with this a little bit. So this is an apple cut in half. So I want you to imagine this is a brain, right? And so this is a brain, and this is going to be the frontal lobe. This is the occipital lobe back here, and this is the midline, right? And it's in the midline, primarily in our frontal lobe, that we think about our own thoughts and we think about other people's thoughts. So this is where we think about ourselves and we think about other people's minds, feelings, emotions. That's all midline, okay? When we perceive a body, we perceive it not in the midline, but we perceive it externally on the next to what's called the motor strip. You may have seen it, the homunculus on the strip on the frontal lobe, and one is for motor movement and one is for perception. So we perceive mind and bodies in completely different places neuroanatomically. That's part of why all of us think we have a body as opposed to we are actually in a body, and our mind is part of our body. We perceive it separate, right? And so our mind brain represents minds and bodies in completely discrete, separate neural circuits. And we experience and believe, just it's automatic thinking, that our minds and bodies are separate categories, despite all the scientific evidence we have to the contrary. We know the mind is what the brain does, but we experience the mind, our minds, and other people's minds sort of separate from the bodies. And this is going to have huge advantages. If I had to have Lois sitting in front of me to be able to interact with her, but even more importantly, if I had to have her sitting in front of me to think about what she might want to hear in this lecture last week when I was communicating with her, that's a liability, okay? And if I'm going to meet somebody I don't even know, I can have an imagined conversation. And all of us right now, if I ask you, all of us right now can imagine a complex conversation with former President Obama. And you can call it up in your mind. You can have a complex imagined conversation with him, asking for a favor. Mr. President, will you do this? And I will do that. Okay. What is that? That's a prayer to an authority figure, asking for help. I'm trying to negotiate reciprocity. I'm submitting to an authority. And so it's just one step removed. And I'm sure nobody at the beginning of this talk, when I said, next week, if you run into Mr. Jefferson, I don't think there was anybody in this audience who went, what? What's he talking about? Who? Where? What? Well, I mean, all of you could instantly imagine running into Mr. Jefferson and having a conversation with him, even though he's, long dead. And you could imagine what he might think. And right now, all of you could imagine a conversation with Mr. Jefferson. That's kind of extraordinary. But I hope you start to see that religious beliefs are just, a slight step away from that, ancestor worship. So we can imagine a conversation with God, asking him for something. It's like asking your boss next week for, can I have an extra vacation time? I mean, it's just one step removed. And this allows for the idea of souls, because those mechanisms, which we'll talk about more formally, theory of mind mechanisms, those things never turn off. And that's part of the pain of grief. When somebody dies, they're dead, but their mind is still alive in your mind and will be for as long as you're alive. It tamps down a little bit, but I'm getting to the age where I've lost a lot of people near and dear to me, and I catch myself talking to them, right? But I hope you see that it's just one step away from the concept of soul and an afterlife and prayers and worshiping the dead and imagining them, looking down on you. It's not. And what is, when we're a child, what is a parent? A parent is somebody who's looking down on us. Freud's original term for superego was Uber-Ich, which he was trying to evoke a parent above me, standing above I. Uber-Ich, above me, above I, right? And that's conscience, and that's the kind of thing that gets evoked. And a lot of gods are moralizing, the original parent. So that's decoupled cognition. Number 7, hyperactive agency detection, faces in the cloud. And these are crucial, and were crucial to our survival. Imagine if you're out and a bush rustles and moves, you're going to startle, and your instant response is going to be that that's a predator, an animal, or even worse, maybe a human, and that's what you're going to assume until proven otherwise. And if it's the wind, it's just a false positive. It's kind of an inconvenience. But if you just thought initially it was the wind and it turned out to be a human or animal predator, you'd be dead. That's a false negative that's deadly. And so our ancestors that just blew it off as a wind didn't leave any descendants. Our ancestors that jumped and thought it was a human or animal predator until proven otherwise, we're their descendants, right? So hyperactive agency detection. And again, think of our ancestors having to make sense of illness, storms, floods, water scarcity, all sorts of potentially life-threatening situations. They don't know what's, causing these things. And it actually, in some instances, may have been very useful to imagine spirits that were controlling it, or spirits particularly at certain times of year. And so they could make actual predictions that had some utility. So again, we don't think our, the few hunter-gatherer tribes and some of the people with primitive religions are stupid. These are ancient mechanisms that we all have, and that go into the modern day religions that's, I believe still plague us, right? So that's hyperactive agency detection. And it couples with another piece of this. Imagine now if there's I don't know if in Calgary there's a public place that's got some famous old oak tree, but let's imagine that there is for just a minute. And I tell you that oak tree will do your laundry, do your taxes, fix your computer, remind you to change the oil on your car. You're just simply not going to believe that. There's too many violations of treeness. That's just nuts, right? But if I tell you that tree on the night of a full moon will answer one wish, okay, all of us are a little bit vulnerable to that, right? Now, maybe not this audience, but we're all a little bit vulnerable to this, and these are called minimally MCIs, they're minimally counterintuitive worlds. And what this means is that they're an optimum compromise between the expected and the interesting, and that they are attention arresting and memorable. And they're important because, again, they hijack something that was crucial to our safety, which is the ability to recognize novelty and remember it and pay attention to it. And so the reason I wasn't in the second example of, hearing your wishes on a full moon, there were almost no violations of treeness with one exception, and that exception was all human qualities. It was basically an agent who could interact with a human, who understood them, understood their wishes. It was pretty clearly, implicitly, a human agent. Okay. Now, one of the classic, minimally counterintuitive worlds in the Catholic Church is the Virgin Mary, a young woman who has a child, but doesn't have to do the usual to have a child. She has the Immaculate Conception. She's exempt from the prerequisites, so to speak. And you can see there are almost no violations of a young woman, a child, and she has an Immaculate Conception. There's still, subtly sex involved, even though she's a virgin. She still conceives, but again, so standard human stuff. She conceives a child. It just, there's one, slight twist on it, and it's attention arresting and memorable. And maybe at some level it's memorable because if God is a father, it's an incestuous relationship, where there seem not to have been any criminal sanctions. The Judeo-Christian God is a minimally counterintuitive world. It's an angry old man who can understand my English. And it's interesting, he knows what I'm thinking, but I still have to talk to him. If he knows what I'm thinking, why the hell do I need to pray to him, right? Because that maintains all the basic human features. And there's some slight twists. He can read my mind. He's sort of everywhere. But the basic Christian God and most gods are MCIs. All right, and they hijack our expectations of the world, but our survival is crucial and required. Fitness is survival and survival of our genes. Our fitness required our ability to see anomalies in the harsh, dangerous environments that we lived in, that we survived. And these minimally counterintuitive worlds are part of what is forged into religions. The gods contain, strategic information about you. They interact with you. They interact with the world. They motivate other people's behavior, particularly ritual. So these minimally counterintuitive agents are very powerful. But again, I hope you see it's just one sort of step away from a powerful parental, caretaking, often paternal figure. And rituals become very important devotions to these gods, these MCIs. Fasting, prayers, taboos, and we'll talk more about the neuroscience about that in a minute. And we create credibility enhancing displays to these agents. Churches, stained glass windows. We invest huge amounts into the manifestations of these agents. Right now, we'll do number 8. And this is theory of mind. Can you all see the cartoon and see the whole slide? Okay.
Yes.
In mine, the top part is blocked off. So theory of mind is a way of saying that we have cognitions that help us think about and perceive other people's intentions, wishes, and desires. We can read a lot of emotions in eye gaze. We read emotions in facial reactions, but we are constantly thinking about what other people are thinking, what they want, what their preferences are, what their desires are, what their beliefs are, because this was crucial to our survival. Remember, we're in small kin-based groups, mutually interdependent on each other for our literal survival, right? And so we have to know we have to try to understand what other people are thinking and wishing. Theory of mind. And these things, as I said, these theory of mind capacities never turn off, right? And there's some fascinating, I'll come to the next, fascinating evidence in this. In I think it was 2009, research done at the National Institute of Neurologic Sciences in the United States during the Bush administration, which I love, during the George W. Bush administration, Kapagiannis and his colleagues showed that when people thought about God, God's belief, God's interventions in the world, other religious ideas, that when people did that in these scanners, the circuits in their minds that lit up were the theory of mind circuits. And I think this is underappreciated research because they showed that, again, religious, all this religious cognition was utilizing everyday, ordinary theory of mind mechanisms. I think it's underappreciated research. In the same year, Epley, who I think is Canadian, and I think there's an Australian, there's a fascinating paper that they did, again, an imaging study in Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. And I sent this to Lois. She's got a copy and can send to people who are interested in it. And again, it's an imaging study, but look at the image on the lower right, and you'll see that the bar graph for God and self is about the same. And for American, meaning other people, it's different. And basically what they showed was that when we think our own thoughts and we think about what God thinks along similar lines, they're almost identical. Whereas when we think about what somebody else may believe, it's a different pattern. And again, what they were showing is that, what I think they're showing basically is what we imagine God thinks and believes are just projections of our own thoughts. But the incredible part of the research is that when they manipulated people's beliefs, lo and behold, God changed his belief in the same direction. An utterly fascinating paper. And again, I think the importance of this is, along with Kapagiannis and others, is that they're showing that religious beliefs utilize everyday, ordinary cognitions, in this case, theory of mind. All right. All right. People often wonder how and why religions spread. And I think there are people working on this that I think have some good ideas. And it's going to be obviously hard to know because so much of this happened in a time before history, before recorded history. There's a group in Canada at University of British Columbia that I think does outstanding work on this. And I look at their website, look at their papers. But this is a paper from Science in 2008. And they, again, they lay out that religions spread to the extent that they facilitate in-group cooperation. And remember, part of why we survived is that we're an ultra-social, ultra-cooperative species. And so anything that enhanced that would be useful, right? And what is the religion, is derived from the Latin religare, which means to bind. Right? And religions also spread to the extent that they reduce the limitations that kinship and reciprocity-based altruism keeps group size down. In other words, you don't have to be kin. You don't have to be involved in specific reciprocity relationships with people. If you can limit those things, then you can open your doors to other people and you can build a group that is not genetically related and not immediately involved in reciprocal relationships. Right. And religions spread because they also hijack our sensitivity to our reputation, particularly our pro-social reputation. Again, when you think of it, which would have been crucial to survival in the small groups where we spent most of our evolutionary history. Religions also utilize the concept of moralizing gods, which monitor our behavior, and particularly monitor behavior that promotes cooperation. So monitors freeloading and behavior that is not cooperative. How many of you are familiar with the experiment where people put eyes above in an office above a coffee maker, where they just asked you to, if you get some coffee, put in, some money in a cup, and when they put just eyes, like plastic eyes above the coffee maker, the amount of money in the cup went up. So we are very sensitive to anybody that's monitoring our social behavior, and particularly our cooperative behavior. Right? These are the Thomson in Africa. And what I want to finish up with now, or the next to the last, is, well, no, it's the last. We're finally on number 10, is the ritual. And I love this statement by Jonathan Haidt, that religions work to suppress our inner chimp, our selfishness, and to bring out our inner bee, our cooperativeness, and that this is one of the crucial things in religious ritual. And the Thomson in Africa, the Andaman Islanders. The Andaman Islands are in the Indian Ocean, and it's a window into deep history. The natives that still are there in the Andaman Islands, who weren't really discovered till the mid-19th century and are still isolated, they and the Aborigines in Australia, these are the closest we have to our original ancestors in Africa. These are thought to be the closest genetically to the original Africans that left Africa 90, 100,000 years ago. And what's fascinating about this is that they have very identical religions, and largely based on song and dance and powerful rituals. And again, if you're interested in this, Nicholas Wade, the former science correspondent for the New York Times, has a book called The Faith Instinct, and he lays this out and makes the case that this is a window into deep history. This is a window into the religions of our ancestors in Africa. And again, a lot of song and dance. There's no ecclesiastical hierarchy, no priests. It's the whole community. There's no distinction of rank. There probably is rank in the communities, but it becomes egalitarian in the rituals, and it's centered on rhythmic physical activity. Why? Right? Serotonin, the oldest monoamine neurotransmitter. This is what is boosted with Prozac and the SSRI drugs. It enhances self-esteem. It is crucial for motor movement, and it is boosted in exercise. When you go out and exercise, you are boosting your serotonin. Aerobic exercise is like 5 milligrams of Prozac. Norepinephrine, adrenaline, one of the other monoamine neurotransmitters. This is crucial for attention, focus, memory, motivation. Dopamine. Everybody thinks of dopamine as the pleasure neurotransmitter. Certainly it is, but it is primarily, it's a motivator. It's what somebody calls the do it again neurotransmitter. It motivates us to repeat action. It's pleasurable, but it also marks things as memorable. And again, dopamine, norepinephrine, serotonin get boosted with aerobic exercise, with movement, right? Everybody's heard of oxytocin. Oxytocin is the trust hormone, and mothers get it, obviously, around birth, and it's for bonding, bonding with the infant. Prolactin, oxytocin, this is your trust hormone. Now, endorphins. Everybody thinks of endorphins as the runner's high. Endorphins are our internal narcotic, and they help ease pain. But endorphins are absolutely crucial to bonding. Again, they're stimulated with physical exercise, but some other things I'll show you. And our ancestors literally stumbled into the neurochemistry that enhanced bonding, memory, bonding, motivation. I love this quote of Darwin's about music. I conclude that musical notes and rhythm were first acquired by the male or female progenitors of mankind for the sake of charming the opposite sex. The musical tones became associated with some of the strongest passions an animal is capable of feeling. When you listen to music, you don't get as much of a high as you do when you make music. When you make music, you really boost your endorphins. I like this experiment. Let's say we take Lois and we put her on a rowing machine, on an ergometer, and we have Lois work out for 10 minutes on an ergometer at a set workload. So we know exactly what her workload was for 10 minutes, right? And then we test her pain threshold, and we can do this with blood pressure cuffs. So we test her pain threshold. And then we have Lois sit on an ergometer for 10 minutes, but on either side of her are people on ergometers moving in sync with her on the rowing machine, right? We do that for another 10 minutes, same work output. And then we measure Lois's pain thresholds. And there's no change in the work output. The only change is the people rowing next to her. And Lois's pain thresholds go up. It's harder to find her level of pain. We've boosted her endorphins simply by symmetrical rhythmic activity. That's all it took. If we take this group that's here tonight and we randomly divide them into two groups, and one group just asked to walk around the building a couple times and come back in. The other group, we ask them to walk around the building the same number of times, but we ask them to walk in lockstep, right? They're marching in lockstep. Come back into the building and play one of these economic trust games. And the group that walked around the building in lockstep in rhythmic, symmetrical activity, they trust each other much faster. That's the only difference. All right, touch. Touch is very powerful, wanted touch. And it triggers endorphins and oxytocin. There are a number of experiments. One of my favorite is by a man named Jim Cohn. And let's say, well, I'm gonna pick on Lois again. Let's say we put Lois in an imaging machine and we show a threat scenario to Lois, and her amygdala just explodes, right? And then we have Lois in the imaging machine, and we have her hold the hand of a stranger and show her the threat scenario. Her amygdala still lights up, but not as much. Then the third one is, again, we have Lois hold the hand of a friend or a partner, somebody she knows, and we give the threat scenario, and her amygdala doesn't light up much at all. And where it really gets wild is that the degree to which her amygdala does not light up is proportional to her rating of the quality of the relationship with this friend or partner or colleague. And what's probably gone on, again, is that touch impacted endorphins, maybe oxytocin, but enhanced bonding and had a direct effect on her brain's fear response. I don't know how many of you happened to see in 2012 when former President Clinton gave the nominating speech to Barack Obama when he was running for re-election in 2012. These two men hated each other. Getting them together was probably tougher than the Mideast peace negotiations. And they finally did it. And if you happen to see it, Clinton did a magnificent speech, utterly brilliant, magnificent speech nominating Obama. And then just when he finished, Obama comes out from behind the curtain on stage, crowd goes crazy. Former President
Can people still hear?
No, he
I cannot.
froze. He froze.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Oh, did we lose him? I
His
was just
network
typing.
bars turned red.
Yeah, yes, they did. I was just typing in the same thing. Is it just me with no sound? Yeah. Oh, what a shame. I wanted to hear what was said.
Yeah, that was. Hopefully he will be back. Well,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hopefully he realizes he's frozen.
Yeah.
yes.
Well, I shut myself. Somewhat earlier. I shut myself off because I was getting bad connection, and it seemed to get better.
Oh, here he comes.
Okay, good.
And we can tell him we're on Obama and Clinton.
Yes. There he is.
Welcome back.
We lost you for a minute. Yeah, you were. It was Obama and Clinton, and you were about to tell us how the crowd was exploded when Obama came out with applause.
Okay, so the crowd explodes. Obama comes out. Clinton walks over to him and literally makes a bow of submission, and Obama hugs him and starts stroking his back like crazy. And you can see this tear come down at Clinton's eye. Now, and again, these two men hated each other. I mean, if you're interested in this, there's a long article in the New Yorker about this. But they did, but they reconciled. And what's important about this is all the ritual involved. All right. So there's a speech of praise. Clinton makes a subordinate gesture to him, and then there's this hugging and the touch. Okay. And the touch was powerful. Just look at the I mean, it was a genuine embrace, and Obama is just stroking the hell out of his back. And if you were watching it like I was and other people, it was a very powerful moment. And I choked up, and I didn't know how much these guys hated each other. But it's, I think, very meaningful, and it has a lot of the elements of a lot of rituals. And I hope you start to see some of the neurochemistry. And some of the other aspects of this are mirror neurons. So if you're not familiar with this, if I raise my right hand, that's lighting up my left motor cortex. All of you that are seeing me raise my right hand right now, your left motor cortex is lighting up too, and there's part of your brain that wants to lift your right hand. They're braking mechanisms that are keeping you from doing it. But that's how powerful mirror neurons are, is that, and if somebody's got brain damage, then I lift lift my hand and they'll lift their hand and they're unaware of any motivation to do so. So we have these powerful mirror neurons. So even if we don't believe it in something, we see religious rituals or certain rituals, and they powerfully affect us through these mirror neurons. And also something that's called the gestalt of the whole, which means we see a whole picture and not just its parts. And so we get the overwhelming impact of rituals. All right. So when we look at cave paintings, you don't see a solitary individual sitting drinking coffee. They're almost all group. When they're humans, they're usually involved in some kind of ritual, often in some kind of dance. Again, think of King Charles's coronation. I mean, the spectacular imagery, but again, you're not going to be unaffected by it because this is affecting you, even though you may think it's nonsense, which I do, a lot of medieval religious nonsense. It's still quite powerful. So what are the functions of religion? It helps resolve a lot of social issues. Freeloading, punishment, commitment. Obama and Clinton became recommitted. Courtship. You remember some of those early pictures I showed you of the Kung San? Men are circling women, and women are able to make assessment of mates, and the men of the women. There's a lot of courtship that goes on in rituals. It obviously eases communal conflict. Obama and Clinton. Territorial defense. It signals the quality and identity of a group. Think of King Charles's coronation, right? But one of the crucial things about rituals is it prepares the group and prepares men for war. I like this cartoon of Jesus. If you believe in me, divide into sects and kill and hurt as many from the other sects as you possibly can. And we all laugh at it, but think back to the coronation, right? What were the main things that were given to, or the instruments that were given to, or to Charles during the coronation? Look closely at that. The majority of them are weapons, right? And if you remember, the leader of Parliament, Penny Mordaunt, had to hold this sword for like an hour. And one of the final parts of the coronation was she was arming King Charles, who is implicitly seen as, a mere messenger of God and of Christ and the Church of England and all that. And she's arming him. So I hope I've shown you some of what goes into ritual, but one of the main things I wanted to show you is how our ancestors really discovered the powerful neurobiology of ritual and how they supercharged it into, again, increasing primarily bonding, right? And bonding at a time where all these other issues are being dealt with. Let's finish up again with a piece of human evolutionary history, but I think illustrates a lot of what I've talked about. Some of you may or may not be familiar with Göbekli Tepe. This was a place that was discovered in eastern Turkey that is extraordinary. It flipped theory on its head. It was thought that we settled down into agricultural communities before we had organized religion, and Göbekli Tepe has turned that around. This was at a time where we still lived primarily as hunter-gatherers, and we came to Göbekli Tepe, which was some kind of religious center where people gathered. And one of the interesting things is that they brewed beer, and probably from wild barley. And why alcohol? Remember the endorphins and bonding. When we drink alcohol, it stimulates our endorphin system, particularly mu opioid receptors. So when we drink, we bond, or it facilitates our bonding. And Göbekli Tepe was full of these where they, brewed beer from barley, wild barley, and it's thought we may have settled into agricultural communities not to make food, but to brew better beer and have better, grow better barley. And the original bread, einkorn, was probably not for eating. The original bread was to store the seeds and the material from barley to save for future brewing. So we may owe civilization to beer. Again, this is from Göbekli Tepe, and you see the touching and the dancing. Right? All right, so let me finish up here. What I want you to do is, when you see this kind of thing, I want you to think about it, because all modern religions still have this echo of our original hunter-gatherer religions. I want you to think of this as song and dance, as intense physical motion. There's probably touching that goes on here. There's symmetrical movement. And these men are bonding, though probably very few of them are actually kin, or actually, formal brothers or cousins. They're bonding. This is, and I don't know if you've heard the chants, even though music is not allowed, the chants of imams, it's some of it is beautiful. Think of this as an echo of the original rituals of our hunter-gatherer ancestors. People think of Buddhists as, bald guys in red robes. No, I mean, Buddhism has a lot of beautiful rituals, again, that contain the same thing. Song, dance, symmetrical movement, right? This is a Buddhist ritual, I think from Bhutan, I can't remember. Think of the men at the Wailing Wall, right? That's a dance, right? That's a sort, and they're chanting. It's a song and dance. Again, the echo of the original religion. The coronation, right? Which was basically a Christian religious ritual that is designed to intimidate us, show the power of the king. He's been armed by the head of parliament. He has all these religious leaders surrounding him from other religions that are sort of implicitly submitting to him. I mean, it's got all the elements. And again, our Pentecostal worshipers, the attachment system, but again, they're singing and moving. And Nicholas Wade makes the case that pews were put into churches, those hard wooden pews that we sat on in Christian churches. They were originally put into churches, I think, in the 14th century to stop the dancing. And so people went outside and had carnival. Okay, let's finish up. I wish you would make up your mind, Mr. Dickens. Was it the best of times, or was it the worst of times? It could scarcely have been both. And if I've done my work well tonight, I hope I have shown you that it was actually and is actually both. I would argue it is the worst of times in that, religions still, as Hitchens said, poison everything. You just turn on the news, pick up a newspaper or your tablet and just look at the news. It's going to have, some awful story that's going to have to do with religion, where there's murder and mayhem and problem as a function of religion. It's still the worst of times in that way. But I think it is also the best of times in that we are the first generations in the history of the world, first generation in the history of our species that understands the basics of why human minds generate religious beliefs, the mechanisms we use, the vulnerabilities we all have. We are really inching towards a comprehensive cognitive neuroscience of religious belief. We really do know the fundamentals of why we believe, how we believe, the mechanisms that are used, why it spreads, so much about it. And I think that leads us to three crucial questions. First of all, what am I going to do with this knowledge, right? I've got it. What am I going to do? What are my obligations with this knowledge? Number two, what are you going to do with this knowledge? Now that you know this, and what are your responsibilities and obligations? But the third and most powerful question is, what are we as democratic, scientifically literate societies, right, in the 21st century, what are we going to do with this knowledge for the coming generations? Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you so much, Andy. That was a wealth of information. I think I'll probably be watching the video of this several times to really get it all together.
No, look, it's a huge privilege. I thank you for having me, and I really do appreciate the opportunity.
Okay, great. So it's time.
Let's see. As usual, I've talked longer than I thought. I don't know if people want a break, but I'm happy to just keep going. But I don't know if people want to catch their breath.
If individuals need a break, they can maybe do it while we go ahead and
sure,
ask some questions. And as I said in the introduction, if we'll use the hand-raising icon, that will keep things a little better organized. And I think I'm going to cheat and ask a question first, and then I'll call on the others. Fairly recently, I read a book called Evolving Brains, Emerging Gods. And while I was reading that, I started thinking of dreams and dreaming about an ancestor or a relative that just passed away. And in early man, what would they have thought when they dreamed about a recently lost relative or loved one? Do you have any ideas on that, Andy?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's I think what would be interesting would be to look at the anthropologic literature and people who interviewed hunter-gatherer societies and people who may have interviewed hunter-gatherers about how they experienced or how they interpreted their dreams. I don't know that literature. My guess is that some of that is out there. But I think you can see that a hunter-gatherer having such a dream would be very vulnerable to thinking that that recently deceased ancestor has revisited them at night. Is still alive in some way and has come back to try to communicate with them.
And that would make it much easier to believe in spirits.
Yeah, I think that I mean, I think, I would I have close friends that I have a close friend, and she had a dream one night where she felt that God was talking to her and told her to avoid a particular place and thing, and the next day people were killed, and she's convinced that that was real, that God had talked to her in her dream and had saved her life. And this is a very educated individual. And, I say, well, probably she had some worries about that place, and, that stimulated the dream. But, it's unlikely that I will ever convince her of my opinion.
Right. Okay, thank you. And Peter.
Yes, so I want to thank you for the talk. Thank you for the cartoon at the end of the Charles Dickens thing, because I was going to bring up Sasha Sagan's work and ask, so is ritual beneficial or harmless? She kind of leads towards, like, even though she's obviously raised non-believer, she sees ritual as something beautiful and harmless. For those of us who've been traumatized by religion, might be differ. So, and leading to your last question, what are we to do with this knowledge? Do you see the need for secular ritual to replace religious ritual, and that it would still meet our needs for ritual, but maybe be less harmful?
I don't know. I'm interested in other people's opinion. I think it's highly individual. If I don't particularly feel the need for ritual. I'm perfectly happy without it. But again, some of that probably comes from my religious experience growing up. I think it's highly individual, and if people, but I hope I've shown you that I think it can have some positive benefit. I think, think about it. I mean, AA is a kind of ritual. And that I think has helped a lot of people. I'm curious what other people think. I just don't know. But I think, again, let me one more thing. The beauty of what's gone on recently is that there's serious scientific investigations of ritual. There's a psychologist at University of Texas, whose name I can't remember, who's just done, I think, some fantastic work on the function of ritual and the nature of ritual, and I think we're, it's just part of we have greater and greater understanding, theories and some empirical evidence, and so to me that's the main benefit, is that we'll just understand it a lot more, and I think its future can be helped by that understanding. And maybe, to go to your point, reduce, where ritual becomes damaging.
Thank you. Don, do you have a question?
Yeah, I do. My comment would be, people of faith often will say to me, well, I'm a simple person. I just believe, the Bible says this, I just believe it. And to me, in my experience with faith, that seems to be people get comfortable with their faith, and they're not curious. They're not asking the right questions. And so the hope that I see from your presentation is that we're only going to get better at understanding the mind and how the mind ties into faith, like how faith is formed by our mind. So I guess I'm just curious what you or maybe others think about the people that are, I want to say, simple-minded. What hope do they have? Like, will we always have those people, or will they one by one kind of grow up in their own way and I guess be non-faith? Anyway, that's just my thoughts.
Again, I like everybody else, I don't know. My hope is that, and this gets into the education system, I think we have enough evidence that right now there's enough evidence and robust theories that nobody should have a psychology 101 textbook in colleges that doesn't have this material in it. It astounds me that it's not more widely known and more widely taught. And again, I'm at a university, and I just can't imagine how you could say that this be kept out of an introductory psychology course. In some high schools, have psychology courses. I think they ought to have this material in it. I mean, these are robust theories, empirical evidence. I mean, and there's really, now we really have a lot, I think, to offer. So I think education, particularly early education, I think you want to get to the point where, yeah, I think it was Hitchens said that you want to get to the point where that religion is laughed at, so that something like King Charles's coronation would be an opportunity for belittlement. I mean, that I don't know about you all, but that basically offended me. I mean, that this man is worth what, $1.5 billion, and the British taxpayer had to foot the bill, and I think it was tens of millions of dollars at a time where Britain was where most British citizens were under financial stress. So I would like to see it where that, that kind of, any kind of religious ritual like that would be seen as ludicrous. And you certainly wouldn't have leaders from democratic societies going to attend it. I mean, what's a monarchy if not something that is the antithesis of democratic societies where people are equal and one man, one vote? But that's a bias of mine.
Thank you. Stephen, your question.
Hello, Dr. Thomson. It's a very nice presentation. And just want to add on one thing. Somebody mentioned about dreaming about their parents or ancestor, and it's actually in the East Asian culture before Buddhism or Christianity came to Asia. Most of the people there actually go for the ancestry. So it's actually like going to adore your god or whatever, but in East Asia, it's actually going for your great-great-grandfather or whoever. So it's like it's rooted in the Confucian religion. Respect, honor thy father and thy mother. So it's in fact a sort of a default religion. And we have all sorts of rituals, and the god were just, imaginary god who were the emperor of the heaven. But in fact, your god is your great-great-great-great-grandmother or grandfather in that case. Now, doing that actually avoid conflict between whose god is better, because it's my ancestor. So, and until Buddhism and Christianity came to East Asia, usually there was no religion conflict. And then when Buddhism and Christianity came, then there become division and conflict in that case.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and no religion has ever survived by tolerating its competitors.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's true. That's true. Yeah.
Thank you, Stephen. I think Melody has a question.
Hi, thank you for that presentation. I found it very interesting. And I was thinking about when you were talking about behavior, and that often the idea of the eyes at the coffee machine. And I've heard people argue that if they hadn't been a Christian and sort of thinking of God looking over them, that they would never have been well-behaved people, that their morals would have been pretty bad. And so I'm wondering, is there really anything to that? I mean, do people behave better by and large if they're religious?
I suspect people have studied that question. I don't know the studies. I don't know the data on that. I would be skeptical. I think there's the old saying, I think it was Steven Weinberg, good people will do good things. Bad people will do bad things. but if you want to have good people do bad things, you need religion.
Yeah.
But I think again it goes. But your question is important, because when you hear people say that and if I hear somebody say that, it hurts, because I think they're saying, and I think they're trying to convince. I think they're trying to convince themselves of some utility of religion, because at another level they've questioned the religion, and they sort of try to justify their continuing in the religion by saying, you know, I would have behaved badly were it not for religion, when at some level they doubt that or they know otherwise. They're trying to justify it. But that's armchair psychiatry. We have evidence, and again, it gets back to the evidence. I mean, we have evidence that we are very moral without religion. We have moral systems in our brain, and I think some of the most beautiful evidence comes from these studies of children. There was a group at Leipzig who studied this, and some of them are funny. I mean, these young children who can't speak, you know, helping other people. I mean, the basic there's one study where this kid, you know, he's helping a stranger toddling over, trying to open a cabinet door to this guy trying to put books in. I mean, they're great studies, but the most interesting one comes out if you look up the moral lives of babies. The woman's name is Kylie Hamlin. She's now at University of British Columbia, and they took like 1-year-old infants, and they showed them these puppet shows where there's a helper puppet and a hinderer puppet, and the infants would prefer the helper puppet. They would avoid the hinderer puppet. They would also go towards the puppet that punished the hinderer puppet. And these are pre-verbal infants. And the paper, the original paper of hers, and it's Paul Bloom and Kylie Hamlin, Paul Bloom, and Karen Wynn. And the paper, that research was deemed so important that it was published in Nature, where they showed that these infants, these pre-verbal infants, are making social, moral judgments. You know, they've not found Christ.
Actually, I've seen a couple of studies of children raised secular, groups of them, as opposed to children raised religious. The children raised secular were more tend to share toys and things more than the ones who were raised religious.
Yeah, no, I think the other one that I would look at is, if you've never seen it, Nicholas Humphrey's essay called "What Shall We Tell the Children?" And it was originally a talk to Amnesty International in 1996. You can pull it up. I think it's published on The Edge, but it's about how we should treat children, and it's just a marvelous essay. And it you know, his argument is that we should spare children, that the children have a fundamental human right to be spared religious indoctrination. Fantastic essay.
Thank you. Dwayne, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, it's a little more of a comment than a question regarding an earlier question about whether or not ritual is dangerous versus harmless and beautiful. In order for somebody to think ritual is completely harmless, they've had to have never gone through indoctrination into any military organization. It is civil, non-religious rituals, from hazing rituals to crossing the line to induction ceremonies. All of those things are heavily involved in turning an otherwise good person into a person who views the people around them as valuable enough to kill other people for.
Mhm.
So ritual is fundamentally dangerous. It is how you make a military.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, and that also goes along.
Because we have,
Go ahead, Andy.
no, I think that's an excellent point. And, you know, we're biased not to harm human bodies. We have to be taught to harm human bodies. We have to be desensitized to doing violence. And combat training is brutal. That's a very good point. It's a dangerous ritual. But I would argue that, you know, that coronation of King Charles, I mean, the end of it, I mean, you know, one of the main things is the member of parliament, the head of parliament, you know, so presumably a democratic, you know, institution, is handing Charles a sword. I mean, really.
Yeah. Okay, Peter, again.
Yeah, just back to when you were talking about the attachment system, and it's just an anecdote, but it just fits so well because when you were talking about this, at one point as a young man, I worked in a grocery store, and I used to get asked to like carry heavy items for elderly customers. And I had a daughter who was about maybe 14, 18 months at the time. And as I was called to carry this sack of flour and hold it for this lady while she paid at the front. And the cashier started laughing at me like crazy. And what I didn't realize, what felt so comfortable was the same weight and size as my daughter. I was rocking and patting this flour in front of everyone, and it was just without even being conscious of it. And just something you said in that just like triggered the memory, you know. It's innate, right?
Yeah, no, it is. We're hardwired, and religion hijacks it. If you have a chance, look at there's a guy named Felix Warneken, and he's a psychologist. He's now at Harvard. He was at Leipzig. And look at his TED Talk, because he's got films of these infants helping out. They're just fabulous. But he's showing that the basis of his TED Talk is that we are hardwired for altruism. And your thing about, you know, you're helping people, you're hardwired, and part of helping people is the attachment system.
Back to the military, they marched in lockstep. And that's what you were saying. It creates the bond between the individual people. It's an incredible example.
Yeah. And what are they called? I mean, they create fictive kin, you know, a band of brothers. Yes. That alludes to, you know, that they're actual brothers.
Neha, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, I would say it's probably more of a comment in the sense that, so when we talk about rituals, probably one example where I actually saw it being a positive situation is I once attended an Arab wedding where they have a ritualistic dance, you know, as part of the wedding, where they all fall, like, you know, get in a circle and do the same step with their feet. And again, there was nothing religious about it, or, you know, with any motive, but I think probably there are some situations where rituals, again, like, may not be harmful, but it just, you know, brings people together in a positive way. So again, rare example, but I thought of that one when we talked about rituals. It's like, again, locking steps together, like, but it's just more so dancing to music and dance. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, I think that's it. Weddings are a great example of that. And you're bonding non-kin. You're making music, which triggers endorphins. There's dancing, triggers all of those neurotransmitters. No, I think that's a nice example of, you know, can be positive ritual.
Dwayne, do you have another question or comment?
Well,
I just No, go ahead. Sorry.
I just wanted to clarify, I wasn't intending to say when I said rituals are necessarily dangerous that they're necessarily bad. Yeah, it's more that they're powerful and they can be used in either way.
They're powerful. They're very powerful. And I hope to show you they're powerful because our ancestors found a way to boost powerful neurotransmitters in our bodies and brains.
Mm-hmm. Could you say more about the strength of music in the brain?
I'm sorry, Lois. I didn't hear.
The effect of music on the brain aren't there more studies about that?
Oh yeah, and again, I think that's the beauty of the 21st century. We just have all this great neuroscience that none of us can keep up with now. I mean, it's so good. But no, there's a book called "This Is Your Brain on Music," and I think it may have been revised too. I think there may even be a second edition, and I think that's one of the books that laid out that when you make music, you boost your endorphins. Just listening to music doesn't give you the same effect as actually making music. Making music is more powerful, is my understanding.
Well, and making music together.
And there are people. I'm sorry.
Making music together as a group.
Yeah. Well, let me I can give you, and you might want to try this at a meeting. I don't know if you all get together personally at a meeting, but when I used to give this talk to groups, right, what I would ask people to do, and you can do this, I mean, get a group of you together and try this. I mean, it'll make you momentarily a little bit self-conscious, but I promise you it'll drive home the point. And what I would have people do is I would have them do three things. I would have them think about how they're feeling. Number one, think about that for a moment. Number two, think about how they feel about somebody with whom they are in conflict. Think about that person with whom they're in conflict and how they feel about that person. Number two. And the third thing would be to take the skin on the back of the hand and pinch it as hard as you can. Try to create as much pain as you can. Right? Those three things. And then I would have the audience stand up and put their arms around each other. Right? So there's touching. And then I would have people start swaying back and forth. So symmetrical movement, back and forth swaying, they're touching. And then I would put up on the slides the verses to Amazing Grace. And I'd ask them to sing Amazing Grace, all 4 verses. And it was deliberate with Amazing Grace because obviously a lot of people, the audiences I talk to are not religious, right? And I'd ask them to, sing Amazing Grace, which offended actually a couple people, and we do that. But it sensitized me because I had some people say that evoked their religious trauma, and so it made me pause, doing this. And so but at any rate, so I'd have people sing all 4 verses of Amazing Grace, and we'd sway back and forth. And then after people stopped and got over some of their self-consciousness, then we would do it in reverse. And I'd ask people to pinch their skin and see if they could create the same level of pain. Nobody could ever create the same level of pain. And then I would ask them how they felt about the person that they were in conflict with, right? And most people said that they noticed, that they just couldn't generate the same level of anger or pissed offness. And then most people said, once the self-consciousness diminished, they felt a little bit better. Now, there's no controls, there's potentially suggestion there, but you know, sometime when you all get together as a group, try it. I think you will be surprised. Now, somebody put in the chat, it's quite a powerful demonstration. You will see. I mean, just and we're talking about 2 minutes or 3 minutes, and if you look at the Aborigines, their dream, their religious ritual would go on all through the night. Okay, I'm you know, think about what was generated. You know, they would do it to where they were in trance states, now, somebody put in the chat that singing "Happy Birthday" might be different. Yeah, and they reminded me. I gave the presentation in Kamloops. There was a wonderful guy up there who organized a conference every year, and invited me, and we sang "Happy Birthday." And the reason I had people sing "Happy Birthday" up there, because at another meeting, a woman had told me that it was just too triggering. And she was really angry with me that I had people sing "Amazing Grace." And so I backed off and just had people sing "Happy Birthday." But, you know.
He froze again.
Froze and
Back.
disappeared.
Yeah.
Oh, there he is. Oh, he's muted.
No, you're mute.
Okay, am I? Can you hear me again?
Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
It's good.
You know, there's some God that's angry at me. I don't know. But again, you know, you go to that simple explanation, you know. But yeah, so I'm curious. Somebody put the thing in the trap. What do people think about singing "Amazing Grace"? Is that too triggering for audiences?
For some of them,
For me, it would be absolutely, yeah. Yeah.
Hey, Jill, do you want to ask your question?
Yes, actually, mine was more, I was wondering if you could clarify for me a bit more about how the genes and suicide work.
I'm sorry?
You had mentioned it in very early in the slides about genes and suicide. And I was just wondering how that worked.
Sure.
I didn't quite get that.
Am I still connected?
Yes.
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Oops.
I don't think he could hear us.
Right. I think we'll probably come back on.
Good question though about suicide.
Mhm.
Hopefully he can come back and tell us.
Yeah, right.
Thank you. I was just like, he kind of touched on it and I wasn't sure of the connection. And I thought, boy, that's really fascinating. I would like to know.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's just wait a minute and he'll probably be able to come back on.
Well, I can give a quick summary of what he said if you just want that. Basically, if a person perceives themselves as reducing the likelihood of their parents and siblings surviving, then they're actually causing their genes to be less likely to survive. So commit suicide, you're no longer reducing their chance of survival. Thus, your genes are more likely to survive.
Mm-hmm. Now, there's an almost joke where they say, I'd give my life for 2 siblings or 8 cousins. And each of those would make up one full set of your own genetic information. So you're passing your own genetic information on by saving somebody, by saving, your relatives. Yeah. Oh,
So
I was just going to add to that. I saw a documentary about a family in Toronto area, I think it's Huntington's, and they knew they carried the gene for it, and it's not quite the same as suicide, but they basically did a pact and said none of us are going to have any children. So some of these genetic diseases, thanks to science, if you're aware of it, you know, you have kind of this awesome, scary power to make decisions like that. You know, it wouldn't be easy to do that, but they kind of, because they didn't know and they didn't really want to know, they just said, you know, we're not going to take the chance and pass it on. So I think it's that kind of attitude or thought process, you know. My offspring might not survive or consume too many resources, so I won't have them if there's that chance. So
wouldn't that be like some Aboriginal tribes saying, you know, like in the high Arctic, saying, you know, I'm not well, I'm not able to contribute anymore, so I'm just going to catch an ice floe and take off.
Yeah,
so that I'm not a burden.
I'm sure it would be.
Yeah.
Yeah, or if there's starvation, you know, droughts or something, you know, there might be individuals who'll say, "Oh, you know, I've done my bit" or something. You know, I don't know. But,
Yeah. I wonder.
Andy's back now. Let's let him answer the question about.
Yeah, I don't know what the problem is. I switched off of Wi-Fi and got on a cell phone. You all can hear me okay?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. Sorry about that. I don't know what the problem is.
Can you go ahead and talk about suicide and genetics?
Sure. One of the you know, one of the great problems is what's the cause, what's the origin of suicide? And there I think several good theories that you know, suicide is a characteristic of human nature, so why would it evolve? Why would it be the capacity for suicide? Why would it be part of all of us? And the theory is that it may have been adaptive in ancestral environments. And that there may be kind of a continuum. The same man that did one of the papers I referenced, Edward Hagen, has a very good theory of suicide called the bargaining hypothesis. And it may explain suicide gestures, is that people threaten suicide to try to compel help from reluctant social partners. So a suicide threat is a threat to disengage from a relationship that was probably crucial in ancestral environments. And I would look at his work and what's called the bargaining model. And in the modern world, the bargaining model can misfire. You know, somebody can make a suicide gesture with Tylenol and they don't think they're going to kill themselves and they die. And then at the other extreme is what is referred to as the burdensomeness hypothesis, that in ancestral environments, if I was a burden on my family, it could have very real, terrible consequences to them. And so my suicide could actually augment their survival. If you look at, I think a nice example of the burdensomeness kind of suicide is look at the suicide note of Virginia Woolf. And it's on Wikipedia. And it's a heartbreaking suicide note that she left to her husband, Leonard. And you see that she feels like she fears she's going to become a burden to him. Another one to look at, and you know, she was, you know, getting older and she was getting ill again, and it's a poignant, and so the idea is that suicide would potentially augment the survival of your kin, and it's an ancient mechanism that we all carry. Another one that have many of you seen the movie Oppenheimer?
Yep.
Okay. If you remember in that movie, Jean Tatlock commits suicide, and look up her suicide note, because again, she talks about how she became convinced that she would be a burden and a liability on other people. And the movie doesn't capture her completely, She probably had bipolar illness. She was struggling with also being gay or bisexual at a time where that was obviously seen as illness or perversion. Oppenheimer was probably the love of her life, and she was probably the love of his life, and she felt abandoned by him. But there's another note she left. Actually, I think it's a letter to a friend talking about her struggles with her sexuality and feeling that something was wrong with her. And you know, she was only 29 years old, but the burdensomeness feeling got triggered in her, and it was tragically deadly. I mean, she's a very gifted woman. She was a physician when that was rare in those days. She's, you know, a real tragedy.
Oh, thank you. Okay, we have 3 more hands, and let's try to do them fairly quickly because we're taking an awful lot of Andy's time.
No,
So-
look, I'm glad you're going to cut me off because I could keep going all night. I think this stuff is important.
Oh,
So,
thank you
you know,
so much. Okay,
The
Steve.
bartender needs to cut me off.
Okay, that's a comments about the bonding before, about singing Amazing Grace. I remember several years ago, the Atheist Association, we had picnic in the park in the summer. And one Sunday, where we were right next to a church group, and they were singing hymns. And so instead of just talking, we decided to sing YMCA by the Village People. That is a very rousing song, easy to sing. So I would strongly recommend, don't sing Amazing Grace, just sing the YMCA, and that will get everybody excited.
That's a
Yeah,
good-
well, the reason I would do Amazing Grace is because the theory behind the demonstration was that even if you were singing something that you really didn't like and you found offensive, it didn't matter because the ritual would override that, and your biochemistry would still be just as effective. So the choice of Amazing Grace was and I thought about other Christian hymns to have people sing because I wanted the people, if they didn't like Amazing Grace, that was actually part of the experiment because and I would say to people, if you really didn't like Amazing Grace but sung it, did you still get the positive impact of the physical ritual? So that was part of why I chose Amazing Grace. And it was, I didn't like switching to Happy Birthday, but this one woman had convinced me that I maybe ought to think through this a little bit more.
Thank you. Okay,
But try it. I mean, sometime if you have a meeting, sometime, try it. I mean, you'll be self-conscious for a few minutes, but I guarantee you it'll get your attention.
Yes. Okay. Melody.
Yeah, just to the Amazing Grace thing. I mean, I've sung that at several funerals, and it's not something I believe in, and certainly the words could be triggering, but it is such a gorgeous melody, and it has been sung by so many incredibly amazing singers and harmonized in so many incredibly amazing ways, and I still think it's a fabulous song.
Yeah. So your pain threshold would probably go way up.
Yeah, I'm sure it would. Yeah, for sure. I just want to ask if these same concepts that you've been talking about are responsible for our beliefs, our modern beliefs, that are often based on some philosophy, for instance, that is nonsensical or anti-scientific, in fact, but large numbers of people buy into it. Is that using the same deep genetic constructs?
Probably. I mean, if look at it and see. I think you'll probably, particularly if it's a really seemingly irrational belief that it probably has some of these mechanisms in it. I think the strength of the paper that came out last December by Leitner and Hagen is that it shows how, you know, our cognition is we have mechanisms that were designed to try to make sense of an ancient world where we really didn't have explanations, and we would come up with what they call useful falsehoods. And I think if you look at any, you know, modern stuff, I think you'll still find some of the same cognitive mechanisms. And you know, a lot of them are errors and glitches, but in ancestral environments, they may have protected us.
Mhm. Thank you. Neha, do you have a question?
Yeah, so I was just trying to think, like, you know, is there research on like, or maybe just conversations around where there can be a middle ground, right? Like, because a lot of people, you know, they'll still hold beliefs, but not to the extent where they, you know, agree with a lot of what the scriptures say or what the ancestors did, but still wanting to find a middle ground because there are benefits, as we have heard, like, you know, in terms of attachment, in terms of community, in terms of being together. So is there, like, you know, a possibility maybe for a middle ground, especially for people to feel a sense of belonging, but removing the bad parts of it and holding humanitarian values above the religious values, but still getting the benefits of religion?
Well, I think that's the Unitarian Church. I mean, I think being realistic, I think that's what one can hope for is middle grounds or compromises that don't harm people. My beef is when it gets involved in government. And Thomas Jefferson, you know, is a local hero around here. And James Madison is also from here, and we don't appreciate what Madison did. And Madison was absolutely clear that, as he said, religion should have no cognizance in civil government. I mean, he wanted a wall between any religion and government. That, you know, the United States is a secular republic, which, you know, a lot of our political leaders forget. And so I don't think I don't want to see middle ground in government, middle ground in policy and law. I mean, it's a secular republic, and you know, people like Pence, I think, are dangerous. But yeah, I think I mean, as long as you keep your religion out of government and keep your religion away from my children, then fine. I don't know if that answers your question, but that.
No, that was helpful. I think, yeah, I agree, especially separating as what we call church and state, and then but the other side is, or I wouldn't say the other side, the impacts that parents can have on children right from a young age. That you know, that shift, I think, would be crucial, especially for, you know, for someone like me, for, you know, to just pass on, like, hey, you if you want to hold on to faith, sure, but, you know, where it's devoid of damaging others or their way of perception of things. So
yeah, that's why I love the Nicholas Humphrey essay. I mean, I think religion is a form of child abuse, and I think children, if we're really serious about human rights and children's rights, I think I absolutely agree with him. Children have a fundamental human right to be spared religious indoctrination, and particularly now when we know, you know, the mechanism of supernatural and religious beliefs. I mean, you know, children should not be poisoned in that way.
Totally.
They want to become religious. If they want to become religious when they're 20 or 25 or 30, fine. That's part of a free society. But, keep it out of government and keep it away from my children.
Well, the trouble is, so many religions, part of the religion is to proselytize, which is unfortunate. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, they couldn't survive if they didn't.
That's right. Yes. Okay. And then the last one, Dwayne.
Now, continuing along the same discussion that was just happening, when you deal with the question of separating religion and state, with the work that has been done to identify the actual tools of religion, is the state using those tools to indoctrinate patriotic thoughts, which is done in the US a lot, any better than indoctrinating into a religion proper? I'd argue they're basically the same thing, and a similar defense needs made.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, patriotism can become a religion, and yeah, I would agree with you. I don't like all the pomp and circumstance that surrounds the U.S. patriotism. I mean, I think it's obnoxious. That somehow what is it? They call it American exceptionalism or something like that.
Right.
I mean, yeah, I think it's, excuse me. I mean, yeah. I mean, we are indeed exceptional in terms of, gun ownership and gun violence. I'll go along with some exceptionalism, but
For sure.
Moral exceptionalism, no. And I think we've betrayed the vision of Madison. I mean, anybody that thinks we're anywhere close to Madison's vision is, kidding themselves.
Well, we've kept you later than we were supposed to, and we appreciate it.
Well, thank you.
More than we can say.
I'm glad to be kept long.
Okay. Good.
No, it's a privilege. No, seriously. I mean, I just think this is such important stuff, and and the Sunday morning news shows aren't showing it, so I have to make my own effort. So, well,
thank you so much, and
thank you.
I don't know, we just might have to have you back for more discussion.
No, I'd gladly come. I thoroughly enjoyed my time in Kamloops. That was a real high point, and I'd happily return virtually to the Canada anytime.
Lois,
so much.
Lois, I think I actually quite enjoyed the Q&A part at the end. Maybe if you came back for a Q&A and we could just continue on the questions, that would be fun.
That would be great. Yes.
No, glad to do it.
Well, we just might plan that then. Thank you so much, Andy. And for me, it's been such a pleasure to get acquainted. I feel like over the last couple of weeks in our exchanges, I feel like friends, and I feel very honored.
No, likewise. It's a privilege, and I mean, you can't imagine what a thrill is. I mean, I'm talking to people in Canada about this stuff that I love, and I live in the Bible Belt. I mean,
yes, I totally get it.
A lot of fun for me. Yeah. So thank you.
Okay. Well, it's getting actually. Andy is in Virginia, which means it's after 11 o'clock there. So thanks again. And everybody, appreciate so much your presence and your questions. This has been a fantastic evening, and it has been recorded. And be sure and tell everybody that wasn't able to come tonight that it'll be up on our YouTube channel as soon as I can get it up there. So thanks again. And I think we're going to have to say good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you again.
Good night.
Thanks, Sam.
Thank you.
Good night. Thank you.